You are operating on assumptions that no longer match the environment you are living in, not because you are careless, not because you failed, but because the rules quietly changed while you were busy following them. Retirement planning did not collapse. It did not explode. It did not announce itself. It simply stopped lining up with reality, and most people did not notice the gap forming under their feet. You were taught a version of financial order that depended on stability, stable careers, predictable expenses, linear progress, a world where time alone solved problems if you stayed disciplined long enough. That framework is still being repeated, still being printed, still being spoken with confidence, but repetition does not make it current, and confidence does not make it accurate. You are not behind because you did something wrong. You are behind because the environment you are planning for no longer resembles the one those plans were built for. Costs move differently now. Work behaves differently now. Longevity interacts with money differently now. None of that required a crisis headline to become dangerous. It only required silence. Most people believe retirement fails loudly. A crash, a collapse, a visible breaking point. That belief is convenient because it allows you to relax until something obvious happens. But that is not how erosion works. Erosion is invisible until the ground gives way. By the time it feels urgent, the damage is already structural. You are told that if you stay consistent, things will balance out, that patience is the missing ingredient, that long-term thinking neutralizes short-term pressure. Those statements were not lies when they were created. They are simply outdated now. And outdated math does not stop being dangerous just because it feels familiar. The uncomfortable truth is this: most retirement plans fail quietly, while the owner believes everything is still on track, not because of recklessness, because the assumptions underneath them were never stress tested against the world that actually arrived. This is not a warning about panic. It is a warning about complacency, a calm, unemotional recognition that the environment shifted and most people are still standing on maps that no longer reflect the terrain. The danger is not dramatic. The danger is subtle. And subtle dangers punish attention lapses, not bad intentions. If you are listening to this, it is not because you are looking for reassurance. It is because somewhere you already sensed that the numbers still add up on paper but feel less solid in real life. That discomfort is not irrational. It is data. And ignoring data has consequences, whether it announces itself or not. If you continue, understand this clearly. Nothing here will comfort you. Nothing here will motivate you. What follows is not designed to make you feel prepared. It is designed to remove illusions before they cost you time. You cannot replace. There is one principle that governs everything that follows. It is not a strategy. It is not advice. It is not negotiable. Time does not compensate for broken assumptions. This is the rule most retirement planning quietly violates. For decades, the dominant belief has been that time is the great fixer, that if you start early enough, stay consistent enough, and avoid obvious mistakes, time will smooth out errors. That belief depends on the environment staying structurally similar across decades. It depends on costs, work, and risk behaving within a narrow band of predictability. When that predictability disappears, time stops being a solution and becomes an amplifier. Time does not heal flawed math. It multiplies it. If the assumptions underneath your plan are slightly wrong, time does not correct them. It compounds the error quietly, year after year, until the difference between what you expected and what exists becomes irreversible. This is why retirement failure rarely looks like a single bad decision. It looks like a long chain of reasonable choices built on a foundation that no longer holds weight. Most people treat time as protection. They believe that starting earlier gives them margin for error. In reality, starting earlier only helps if the structure remains valid. When the structure changes, early commitment can lock you deeper into an outdated framework. The calendar keeps moving, but the math stops reflecting reality. This principle is uncomfortable because it removes a familiar safety blanket. It means patience alone is not a virtue. Discipline alone is not protection. Consistency alone is not intelligence. Those traits only work when applied to a system that still behaves as expected. Look closely at how people talk about retirement. They rarely talk about assumptions. They talk about discipline, habits, and long-term thinking. Those are behaviors, not foundations. Behaviors cannot fix a foundation that no longer matches the load placed on it. Time is neutral. It does not care whether your plan is correct. It will advance regardless. If the assumptions are sound, time works quietly in your favor. If the assumptions are flawed, time works just as quietly against you. The silence is what makes it dangerous. This is why so many people are surprised late in the process, not because they were reckless, because nothing felt wrong while it was happening. The plan did not break. It slowly drifted away from usefulness while still appearing intact. A broken assumption does not announce itself. It does not cause immediate pain. It produces small mismatches between expectation and reality that are easy to rationalize. A little higher cost here, a little less flexibility there, nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, until the cumulative effect becomes visible, and by then, time has already done its work. The most damaging belief in retirement planning is not optimism, it is inertia. The belief that what once worked will continue to work simply because it has not failed yet. Time rewards alignment, not loyalty. This principle does not care how responsible you feel. It does not respond to effort. It does not negotiate with good intentions. It operates silently, continuously, and without exception. Time does not compensate for broken assumptions. It exposes them. Everything else in this discussion is simply a consequence of whether that principle is respected or ignored. The first failure is assuming expenses age gently. You treat future costs as a slower version of today, adjusted slightly upward, as if time only adds wrinkles and not weight. In daily life, this looks like renewing subscriptions without noticing, accepting higher insurance notices without recalculating anything, absorbing small increases because they feel manageable. It is like packing for a long trip using yesterday's weather forecast. Calm acceptance replaces active awareness. The judgment here is simple. Ignoring cost behavior is not optimism, it is passivity. And passivity compounds quietly. What follows is not relief, but pressure building without resistance. The second failure is believing income fades predictably. You picture work tapering off in a straight line, effort decreasing while stability remains. In reality, income does not fade, it fragments. Hours change, roles shift, reliability weakens. In everyday terms, this means saying yes to flexibility that quietly reduces leverage, or accepting instability because it feels voluntary. It is like standing on ice that looks solid because it has not cracked yet. The surface holds until it doesn't. The judgment is not about choice, but awareness. Predictability is not owed to you just because you earned it once. The next erosion does not pause to announce itself. The third failure is treating inflation as a background noise instead of an active force. You acknowledge it exists, but you mentally file it as something that averages out over time. In practice, this means noticing higher grocery bills, higher maintenance costs, higher service fees, and adjusting lifestyle expectations instead of assumptions. It is like turning down the radio instead of fixing the engine noise underneath. Calm adaptation replaces structural attention. The judgment is detached. Adaptation without recalibration is surrender disguised as maturity, and surrender creates momentum you do not control. The fourth failure is assuming flexibility remains available later. You believe that if things tighten, you can adjust when needed. That belief depends on health, energy, and opportunity remaining accessible on demand. Daily behavior shows this in delayed decisions, postponed reevaluations, and quiet confidence in future optionality. It is like assuming exits remain open because they were open earlier. The judgment is unemotional. Flexibility is perishable. Waiting does not preserve it. Waiting consumes it. The fifth failure is mistaking account balance for readiness. You look at numbers growing and feel reassurance. even as purchasing power and optionality shrink. This appears in daily life as comfort with statements that look larger, while real-life choices feel narrower. It is like watching the water level rise without noticing the shoreline moving inward. The judgment is blunt. Visibility is not the same as control. Numbers can grow while usefulness declines. Each of these failures shares the same pattern. They do not feel like mistakes. They feel reasonable. They feel adult. They feel responsible. That is why they persist. They are reinforced by calmness, not panic, and calm mistakes last longer than loud ones. The rhythm never stops. One quiet drain blends into the next. None of them demand attention individually. Together, they reshape the outcome without asking permission. This is not about fear. It is about recognizing that retirement failure is rarely caused by a single wrong move. It is caused by a sequence of unchallenged assumptions carried forward because nothing forced them to stop. And nothing forces them to stop until time finishes exposing them. At a certain point, I stopped measuring progress the way everyone around me did, not because I had better information, not because I saw the future, because the signals stopped matching the behavior they were meant to justify. Nothing dramatic triggered it. No crisis, no loss, just a growing mismatch between what people said was working and what their daily reality suggested was actually happening. Conversations sounded confident. Routines looked disciplined. Outcomes, however, felt increasingly constrained. More effort, less margin, more planning, less flexibility. The math still balanced on paper. Life felt tighter anyway. I noticed how often people explained away pressure instead of examining it. Rising costs were treated as temporary. Reduced leverage was framed as lifestyle choice. Narrowing options were reframed as maturity. None of these explanations were false on their own, but together they formed a pattern of accommodation rather than control. So I stepped sideways, not forward. I didn't optimize harder. I didn't chase efficiency. I simply stopped assuming that time would fix structural misalignment. I stopped trusting that consistency alone implied correctness. That decision did not improve comfort, it removed it. While others took reassurance from stability, I treated stability as a question mark. While others waited for confirmation, I treated silence as information. This was not contrarianism. It was risk awareness without theatrics. When environments change quietly, visible signals arrive late. I paid attention to constraints instead of projections. How easy was it to adjust direction without friction? How quickly could commitments be reversed? How dependent was future flexibility on current health, energy, or cooperation from systems that did not answer to individual effort? These were not questions people enjoyed discussing. They were also not questions that showed up in standard planning conversations. This approach did not make me feel ahead. It made me feel exposed. Because once you stop relying on inherited assumptions, you lose the comfort of shared belief. You stop being reassured by group confidence. You start noticing how often certainty is borrowed rather than earned. There was no moment of clarity, just a steady narrowing of what I trusted. I trusted systems less. I trusted averages less. I trusted long-term promises that required uninterrupted stability less. Not because they were guaranteed to fail, but because they demanded conditions that were no longer neutral. Most people around me interpreted caution as pessimism. They saw questioning as hesitation. But hesitation implies indecision. This was not indecision. It was refusal to let time run unexamined. Time left alone does not reward loyalty. It rewards alignment. The difference between this posture and the crowd was not intelligence. It was tolerance for discomfort. It is easier to follow a plan that feels familiar than to admit the environment no longer supports it. Familiarity feels like safety, even when it is outdated. I did not gain certainty from stepping away. I lost false confidence. That loss mattered more, because false confidence encourages passive continuation. And passive continuation is how broken assumptions survive for decades without challenge. This is not a story of foresight. It is a description of subtraction. Removing trust where it was no longer justified. Removing comfort where it was masking risk. Removing the belief that patience substitutes for relevance. Authority does not come from predicting outcomes. It comes from recognizing when the inputs no longer match the outputs and refusing to ignore that mismatch simply because it has not punished you yet. The crowd moves when pain becomes unavoidable. Systems narrators move when signals stop aligning. That is not superiority, it is timing. And timing, once lost, does not reset. If you are serious about not being surprised in 2026, this is where the conversation ends, not with answers, but with positioning. There is nothing to buy, nothing to follow, nothing to copy. What matters now is identity, not action. Most people see themselves as planners, responsible, disciplined, long-term thinkers. That identity is comfortable because it aligns with effort already spent. Letting go of it feels like admitting waste. So they protect the identity instead of examining the structure beneath it. The alternative identity is quieter and less flattering. It is the person who does not confuse motion with progress. The person who treats calm as a signal to look closer, not relax. The person who accepts that being early often feels wrong, lonely, and unnecessary until it doesn't. If you are tired of working and still standing still, understand this clearly. Effort is not the missing variable. Alignment is. And alignment does not announce itself with confidence or applause. It announces itself by removing comfort first. This is not about fear. Fear is loud. This is about clarity. Clarity strips away stories you used to rely on. It replaces reassurance with responsibility. Not responsibility to act, but responsibility to see. Most people will keep assuming the math still works because nothing has forced them to stop. They will wait for a visible break, a headline, a crisis that gives them permission to rethink. By then, time will have already decided the outcome. You do not need to be smarter than the system. You only need to stop outsourcing your sense of safety to assumptions that no longer match the environment. That shift does not feel empowering. It feels destabilizing. That is how you know it is real. If you recognize yourself in this, not emotionally, but structurally, then you already understand the point. This was never about instructions. It was about removing the false floor beneath familiar plans. Some people will hear this and move on unchanged. They will call it pessimism and return to comfort. Others will feel something quieter, the loss of certainty without the gain of answers. That discomfort is the threshold. Nothing more needs to be said. Silence after clarity is enough. If you are serious about not being surprised in 2026, this is where the conversation ends, not with answers, but with positioning. There is nothing to buy, nothing to follow, nothing to copy. What matters now is identity, not action. Most people see themselves as planners, responsible, disciplined, long-term thinkers. That identity is comfortable because it aligns with effort already spent. Letting go of it feels like admitting waste. So they protect the identity instead of examining the structure beneath it. The alternative identity is quieter and less flattering. It is the person who does not confuse motion with progress. The person who treats calm as a signal to look closer, not relax. The person who accepts that being early often feels wrong, lonely, and unnecessary until it doesn't. If you are tired of working and still standing still, understand this clearly. Effort is not the missing variable. Alignment is. And alignment does not announce itself with confidence or applause. It announces itself by removing comfort first. This is not about fear. Fear is loud. This is about clarity. Clarity strips away stories you used to rely on. It replaces reassurance with responsibility. Not responsibility to act, but responsibility to see. Most people will keep assuming the math still works because nothing has forced them to stop. They will wait for a visible break, a headline, a crisis that gives them permission to rethink. By then, time will have already decided the outcome. You do not need to be smarter than the system. You only need to stop outsourcing your sense of safety to assumptions that no longer match the environment. That shift does not feel empowering. It feels destabilizing. That is how you know it is real. If you recognize yourself in this, not emotionally, but structurally, then you already understand the point. This was never about instructions. It was about removing the false floor beneath familiar plans. Some people will hear this and move on unchanged. They will call it pessimism and return to comfort. Others will feel something quieter, the loss of certainty without the gain of answers. That discomfort is the threshold. Nothing more needs to be said. Silence after clarity is enough.